Good afternoon. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of the CMC Board of Trustees and Assistant Vice Provost at The Ohio State University. Welcome. Today's forum, Holiday Spirits and Mixology, features panelists that will allow us to take a full spectrum look at the business of liquor, from distilling and bottling spirits to the food and beverage business of bars and restaurants, to the creative craft and showmanship of mixology. So please welcome co-founder of Middle West Spirits, Brady Konya, nationally acclaimed mixologist of Emmett Miranova, Cris Dehlavi, mixologist and owner of the trend-setting Denmark on High, Garry White, and one of CMC's favorite speakers and hosts, the editor of 614 magazine, Travis Hoewischer. Travis, the podium's yours.
Thanks, Mindy and Jane. I had to read my bio again today in the program, and luckily I didn't have to update it because it says that I get to talk about booze for work during the day and how excited I am. And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect, because now I'm here doing this again for the second straight year. Last year we got to talk about craft beer, and now here we are going to talk about a not forgotten and also equal part of the local drink evolution, I think you would call it in Columbus, our sort of spirit scene. Brady, it's funny because Brady and Cris and Garry, I all know, I would say through my work with the magazine, but also through my hobby of drinking as many delicious cocktails in Columbus as humanly possible. Not even always dressed this nice, so this is nice to join you guys in this historic building. Maybe we'll start there. Let's start with history. I think, and this is just kind of to the group, and while this might sound a little bit vague, I think it's always a little bit of a fascinating topic for me. Like, how did we get here? And I know that's a little wide-reaching, but even 10 years ago in Columbus, you're not sitting down and someone's handing you a cocktail list. No one's saying barrel-aged anything. Now you're seeing this rapid evolution of kind of the consciousness and the vernacular in this whole thing. Can you guys each maybe give me, on a local level, where you saw that starting to kind of shift and change? And maybe we could even start with you, Cris, because you've kind of been, out there all around the country doing this for a while. Can you give the audience a little bit of an idea of when that sort of started to take root?
Yeah, absolutely. 10 years ago, there were no cocktail bars, and there were no bars that were doing anything fresh. And so I think I and a couple of other people started first with that, doing fresh cocktails and fresh ingredients, and then with that came competitions that came to our city, and that started kind of building this cocktail community. The distilleries, which was tremendous for us to have, people actually distilling spirits here in our city, and then the USBG, which is the United States Bartenders Guild, which I'm the president of. And, when we started the chapter here, we had 4 members, and now we have 75 people, which is incredible. And so, most of the people that you see in these bars and restaurants are part of that guild, and it's just a community of bartenders. So it's been a process for sure over the last 8 to 10 years, but it's going strong.
Now, I would like to get back to the USBG here a little bit later, because I think that is a key part that I think a lot of people here today probably aren't highly aware of.
Sure.
Let's just back up with what she said there real quick. She wasn't talking about creative ingredients and your own shrubs and making your own bitters. You're literally saying a couple people started making fresh cocktails. So just to give you an idea of that sort of evolution, it's like somebody 10 years ago was like, we should start using fresh ingredients in our dishes at restaurants. It's true though. That's how long it's taken for this to kind of take root here, and how rapid it's evolved over the last 5 to 8 years.
Bartenders were using bottled sour mix and things like that. We weren't using fresh juice. Now we have juicers on our bars, and we juice. And we would never think ever to use anything that came out of a bottle. Of course it's fresh, always, every time.
And Garry, maybe I can have you jump in here, but I think it's similar to the way we talked last year with the craft beer revolution, that you know, it used to be like, okay, maybe you have an IPA in the corner of the bar, and now it's you don't even open a bar if you don't have 25, 30 taps. It's suicide borderline. So,
or you can open a cocktail lounge because we have 3.
Yeah, let's open a cocktail lounge. Yeah. At a cocktail lounge, you have 3 beers, and that's fine. But I think that's an interesting part right there. Is that like these are the things that the average public doesn't necessarily think about. Or like you're saying that well, we wouldn't be caught dead using sour mix. These are the things that we traditionally have at our home bars because you're not sitting there and mixing up a fresh cocktail. Do you see those things carrying down to on the consumer level? I think there's clearly such a massive increase in people's education and interest in making these things at home.
I would say the interest in the bar culture really kind of sprung from the interest in the food culture. People generally being more interested and concerned with what they eat and the things that they are ingesting. So all of a sudden, one of our big things is we try to get rid of anything that's processed out of, we try to get rid of all those things. Do everything fresh, it's something that I think the food industry picked up a little bit before, and the bar industry has kind of started to pick up, and it's really taken a lot of momentum over the last 10 years for sure.
And you guys typically, I think, tend to mimic the same personality traits of those line cooks, those sous chefs, those executive chefs, the same personalities that we kind of get across in some of our magazines. Talk a little bit about, and then we'll get to, I'd like to talk to you, Brady, here a little bit about the business side of things, but, and I think we can lead with Garry maybe addressing this, and Cris, if you would like to as well, but we'll talk about the recent, like the symbiosis of having a couple of organizations like Middle West and Watershed on the ground here in Columbus, producing local spirits. And do you feel like, not just from an economic level, but do you feel like that's a sort of dual way to kind of raise that consciousness where even if people aren't out going to cocktail lounges, they're getting a bottle of Ohio for Christmas, or they're, picking up a bottle of Watershed vodka, and how you guys sort of the two of those things under one sector kind of team up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of the whole, food and cocktail movement is really, an emphasis on locality. Where are our things coming from? It's something that I'm very concerned about. We try to source as many local ingredients as possible, and being able to have really incredible spirits that are brewed here in Columbus make a huge, huge difference. We're continually able to talk to people about these great spirits that we have kind of going on, and it's a really great range, and getting ready to get a little bit wider, if I understand Brady correctly, with a couple of different things. So,
and just a small drop of sweat dripped from Brady's forehead. Maybe that's the perfect time, unless you have anything to add there, Cris.
I was just going to say that also has given us national attention within the last couple of years, having the distilleries and having this great cocktail scene. When I first started doing this, we were looked at in the mixology world as a secondary market, and now we're almost to the point where we're considered one of the big markets. Chicago, New York, LA, Columbus, which is tremendous, and we're getting a lot of national attention because of the USBG and because of the distilleries and the things that are happening here, which is really cool.
And I think it's probably safe to say that doesn't happen without both of those things at once, not to that level. Like both of those kind of raise the tide together. So here's the nice thing. I don't know if I've ever actually said this to Brady, but this is one of those things where we want to celebrate local, and I think as Columbus and different sectors catches up with some of the bigger cities, with the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Bostons, the LAs, you root for local, but you also want it to be good. And I think that was probably one of the biggest reliefs / joys that when Middle West and Watershed started, putting products on the shelves, you were like, oh, this is actually really, really good. So I wanted to even ask the bartenders, are you guys? You're welcome. Thank you. But it had to be like a nice feeling. I'm sort of like, oh, okay, we're going to have a couple of companies making new spirits, but your ultimate goal was to put these great fresh cocktails in front of people and sort of raise the culture and change the palate. What would have happened if the local spirits weren't good enough?
It wouldn't have survived. I mean, just because it's local doesn't mean it's good, and it's become this trend everywhere that everything's got to be local. But if it's not good, then people aren't going to embrace it. People have embraced it because it's distilled very well and it's delicious.
So Brady, take your bow. Good job. You guys made a good product.
I think that's actually a really great segue, because what's happening in craft distilling right now isn't unlike what's happened in beer and wine over the last 20 or 30 years, what happened to farm wines in the 1970s, what happened to craft brewing in the 1980s, and then now kind of a resurgence after the correction in 2000. We're at the beginning of, I think you referenced an evolution that's been underway since 1933, since the end of Prohibition. But I think that Cris making a reference to this idea that local isn't always good is happening everywhere all over the country. And while innovation is at its highest level right now in our industry, I think there's over 900 craft distilleries nationally right now. When Middle West opened in 2009, there was 50. We were one of the first 50 to open in the country. And there's over 900 now. And a lot of those products that are coming out aren't good. And we're swimming, kind of cross stream between people wanting to support their local purveyors and a category trying to legitimize itself amongst global brands. So to have this kind of symbiotic relationship with really talented technical bartenders is fantastic in a city that's really trying to get attention for its chops behind the bar. Now, that being said, the vast majority of the volume that's sold in the state of Ohio is not through technical bar programs. It's still in burger joints and dive bars and chain restaurants, and there's a lot of work for us to do. But in every category, take for instance something like athletics, you've got companies like Nike that markets to professional athletes, and they make products for professionals, and they're professional in all of us. And I think that Garry's reference to the food culture and all of us getting a lot more thoughtful about what we eat, craft spirits in particular, and spirits in general, have become a lot more attuned to that language much faster than beer. In terms of cocktails being culinary, cocktails being food, liquor being food, because quite frankly, local beer isn't sourced locally. Local spirits are. So the economic impact of what a distillery can produce in a state like Ohio is 5 times that of a brewery for the same amount of product, simply because we actually source most of our grains, ingredients from here. Right? So these aren't just local recipes, but they're local ingredients with a sense of place and the way they taste, because they come from here. And I think because of that, the vernacular that we share in the kitchen, behind the bar, and its producers have created a really interesting relationship that has allowed Columbus, even in 10 years, to ascend into a place in a national conversation with potential that I don't think we all saw coming just a few years ago.
I just love that you basically said that now beer and spirits are considered food.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm like, yes, I'm allowed to have that at noon.
Yeah.
Leave me alone. I'm just supporting Columbus. Everything's fine. And I'm still going to keep drinking Bodie. I mean, I'll drink local, however local is. That's the other maybe good place to transition there too. What is the biggest hurdle? Because I mean, you're talking about swimming in a somewhat diluted independency and also being part of this giant ocean of spirits and these major brands. What is the biggest hurdle to overcome? Is it price point? Is it brand familiarity? A combination of both? Or maybe has that even shifted somewhat over the last 5 years, what your main target is to try to get into those people in the burger joints, or get into those people who are just are like, I buy a bottle of Grey Goose, or I buy a bottle of this?
Well, we're not any different than a regular retail consumer packaged good. I mean, it's the difference between a local syrup maker coming out and trying to find shelf space against Nestle. The difference is that the regulation in our world is significantly different. Even in Ohio, breweries and wineries make 3 to 5 times as much profit on a single bottle or can as opposed to a distillery. The taxes and the cost of entry and the barriers to entry are significantly higher for a spirits maker because of the hangover from Prohibition that ended in 1933. But we're still dealing with, I think, the mindset of syntaxes and that I think Ohio's budget for or revenue for alcohol this year will usurp $1.1 billion. It's a big line item in the state's budget. So their interest in re-regulating that very quickly has been tepid at most. And actually, this is the first year that we're actually seeing some movement in there. So I think regulation is a big piece of that. But on the other side of it is just from a product standpoint, there's a premium in craft spirits that's around this perceived sense of scarcity. This idea that if you've got something good and it's hard to find, everybody wants it. But as soon as everybody has it, nobody wants it, or you don't get the premium anymore. And the honest back end of that is that we could, even in our existing remodel, would be probably one of the top 5 largest craft producers in the country from a capacity standpoint. But that's still 1/1000th of what a major producer in Kentucky would produce. We're tiny in terms of economies of scale, and quite frankly, in order to make money and create the budget to go out and advertise and promote your product outside of the state of Ohio, because for us to be an enduring company long-term and have employees with medical insurance and all those things that you want to be when you grow up into a real business, the kind of scale that we need requires us to have relevancy in markets that aren't local. And quite frankly, the local story doesn't pan out in Boston or New York or LA when you're in Columbus. So we have to work a lot harder, and maybe getting a little bit ahead of myself in terms of what's coming down the line, but a big piece of what we're trying to do is diversify our revenue and our story and our offerings, and create other ways of ensuring that the business is in a good place over the next 5 years, so we can pour money back into our passion for craft spirits and ensure that the brands that we produce here locally have relevancy in markets that aren't local.
Like, Brady, you don't need to have health insurance. You have whiskey.
Yeah.
Just like 1933, it's medicine. Can you, and after this, I'd like to talk with Garry and Cris a little bit more about the kind of community that we've seen spring up from the USBG. But can you give the audience a little bit more? Can you shine a little bit more light on exactly to what extent we've had these conversations personally. This is stuff that's been in the press. Exactly how much more punitive the way the state handles spirits compared to buying your keg of local beer or wine.
Yeah. So imagine until maybe 2 years ago, if you came into Middle West Spirits and we walked you through an experience, a tour, and we shared samples with you, we couldn't charge you for that. We could charge you for the experience, but we couldn't charge you for the samples. In fact, the state forced us to give you our products for free. I mean, it's pretty outrageous.
Kind of says it all right there.
Yeah. In addition to that, we couldn't serve you a sample of that alcohol in the way that you would traditionally drink it, which would be in a cocktail or with food. So if you're a brewery, you can not only charge for your samples, but you can serve beer, wine, and liquor, just like a restaurant, along with food. If you're a winery, you can do the same thing. If you're a distillery, you can serve neither beer, neither wine, neither spirits or cocktails, and you couldn't charge for your samples. So, and then once your product gets into market, the state marks it up 46%. The feds add another 10% on top of that you pay when you make it, not when you sell it. And then if we want to sell it at the distillery, we have to buy it back at state wholesale. And we don't even get the commission on it. So it was, at the end of the day, a lot of our folks in the industry were like, why did you even get into the business? Because the pro forma doesn't really show much of an ROI for a while. But I think part of, if the writing is on the wall, and I came from Seattle. I'm a transplant here. 8 years ago, we were just talking about the fact that many of us met nearly 8 years ago, and I thought I'd only be here for maybe 2 years at most. And I fell in love with the city during the downturn of the recession, and still found a spark with my business partner to want to reinvest in the city and stay here. But this is a long game for us, and if you look at the numbers for what's happening nationally in craft spirits, we're at the beginning of the brewing boom 20 years ago. We also recognize the fact that there wasn't a lot happening out here in Ohio, despite the fact that all the best ingredients are grown in the Midwest. Growing up drinking micro coffee and farm wine and ground zero for craft breweries out in Seattle, I came out here and we thought even with a little bit of re-regulation, a good 5-year head start on anybody else would be a good way to get it started. And quite frankly, nobody in our business, whether it's Middle West or really anybody in the craft spirits category in Ohio, is making any money. These are 401ks. Again, they're long games. And our focus, we've spent 5 years trying to re-regulate re-regulate. And again, I think this is the year we're going to bust through. And because of hopefully the re-regulation by the end of the year, it'll put us in a profitability standpoint going into 2016. We can actually start paying off the loans that have allowed us to maintain our independence as an independent operator. We've never given a penny away in equity. We've always worked with banks that originate their funding here in Ohio to keep it local, and it's been hard. We have to sell a product to buy a barrel, sell more vodka to buy more whiskey barrels. We've done that for 6 years or 7 years, and because of that, we're in a place now where I think the regulation and the profitability hopefully will catch up. But at the end of this, when we talk about diversification and what it means for us as a company and what it means for you as a consumer, especially one in our own backyard, I think that's where things start getting really interesting and where we start getting really excited about what's coming down the pipeline.
See, now it's almost Christmas. I know you guys are going to buy a bottle of something for somebody. Reach for that local bottle, because you just heard everything that it went into to get it onto the shelves. Yeah. You need to go for a Watershed or a Middle West. So Cris and Garry, you guys could answer this in whatever order you like. But first of all, I think I would like to propose this. Even though this is your decorated title, we can come up with a better term than mixologist, right? It's terrible.
I hate it.
It's like that shows how young the craft cocktail scene is that I feel like somebody just made it up in a newspaper in Portland like 20 years ago, and then they just have to stick with that.
It's like a Red Robin term or something.
Yeah. I don't mixology. So here's the thing, and this is what I like about the Bartenders Guild, is that these are bartenders. These aren't just bartenders. These are not the bartenders that you grew up with that have just got a towel around their belt and twisting off a bottle cap or pouring a couple bottles together. In the local cocktail scene, I would put it on par with music, art, the local beer scene. These are often this is your sort of denizen of creative people in Columbus, and it's been really fun to see the people that are even joining the scene in the last year or two that have no experience in the service industry, or maybe they're a former line cook or they're a bass player. I have no idea, but can you guys talk to how much fun it is to kind of, and you guys are on somewhat of the older side of that, and you can see the age range for a.
I just had a
hey, look, it's in here.
Watch it, buddy.
It says several years of a mixology. But really though, but you guys are two of the sort of the part of the veteran class of that I think kind of brings people in through the younger side. And can you just talk about how much fun it's been to see that? Like you said, 75 members, and this is throughout the city, and the collaboration, the creative spirit that kind of comes out of that.
It's tremendous. It warms my heart, to see what we've built, and I'm very blessed because I've chosen this as my career, and like you said, it's not just, the bartender that you grew up knowing. It is a lucrative career. It's something that I have built, and I love what I do. I'm very blessed. And I think that Garry probably agrees with that.
Absolutely. This, it's been an amazing ride, starting with, the whole Denmark thing, but my entire bar career, career, I'm sitting here in front of a group of people talking about something that I'm really passionate about and love to do. And I tell people almost every day that come into my place, I have one of the best jobs on the face of the earth. I get to interact with people. I get to throw out thought seeds. I get to talk about local stuff. I get to make at least a little bit of impact in the way that people are kind of thinking, or at least get them to think about a few things. And we also, at the same time, get to craft some really incredible cocktails that elevate the way that people drink, the way that people think about food and how we drink, which I think is very important.
I mean, maybe this is a little bit of a philosophical question, but I mean, I think part of the fascinating thing about this is that, like, people associate classic cocktails somewhat, less so now, but I mean, with maybe this rarefied air, or this sort of, there's maybe this sort of perceived pretension there. What is it that you might say to make people understand why it's an interesting, cool thing beyond just sort of like, I don't really care about elevating my palate. What's the narrative there? What's the story? Because I think that's something that I can see even just walking into some of these cocktail bars, that it is about the experience, and it is about, whether that sounds corny or not, a sort of like narrative or a sort of experience about what's happening with that drink and where it's coming from.
Well, I think that goes back to what you said about being a mixologist. I mean, I've been called every possible in your magazine, you know? I mean,
I run
really,
out of
like,
ways to say they're really, really good at
all
making
the
really good
different
drinks.
titles. I mean, when it comes down to it, I'm a bartender. I tend the bar. I want you to come in and feel amazing at my bar, and when you leave, I want you to want to come back to my bar. And so, you know, I think that's a big part of it. That experience is all about hospitality and making you know, a great cocktail, but you come because you want to hang out with me, you know, because I give you that experience. And M is a great backdrop. Obviously, it's a beautiful, amazing restaurant. But if I was a jerk, you know, you wouldn't come back. So I think that's, for me, it's all about hospitality. And I make a great drink, but it's about the hospitality part to me.
Yeah, you can't forget the classic part of the bartender role, which is for people to feel like they want to pull up a stool.
Right. And I think
whatever they're ordering.
I think in the country there are definitely the pretentious, I'm a mixologist people in bars, but they're not all that way.
I mean, from personal experience, there's definitely, it's interesting to watch that balance because you have a lot going on back there.
Right.
You know, I mean, like the public didn't stand up one day and say, I desire for all these cocktails to have 15 more steps in them. That came, well, it did though. It came organically from the people that were interested in making those things. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, that like at the end of the day, it still has to be something comfortable and fun that people will keep coming back to.
Yeah.
While also getting that great cocktail.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of that's about reading your guests and reading the people that are walking up to your bar too. You know, what kind of experience are they looking for? I've got people that come in that want simply to have a drink and they just want to be in a fun environment with different things going on. And you've got the other people that will gather around and, you know, just grill you on just different things. I want to gather knowledge out of you. Those are some of my favorite people. You know, I get to really explain, you know, what's going on and, you know, get, you know, a little bit of a better idea of the craft, you know, and explain that out to people. So yeah, and I agree that the whole mixologist term, I think, is a little bit of a, I don't know, a foofy kind of term. We're bartenders, you know, we tend bar. There's nothing real fancy about it.
And excuse me. I think that there's also, you know, something that's kind of coming down the pipeline, and certainly something that we see in a lot of markets across the country is, I don't know if we reference it as trade bartenders or technical bartenders as opposed to kind of part-time seasonal bartenders. But the same way that food kind of went through this whole locavore thing and is now kind of, you do local because it's the right thing and everybody's doing it. It's not a reason to market it that way anymore. Now it's really about finding the best things that are local. And in the cases that you don't have the best things local, well, then don't use them. Right. So on the bartending side, on the food and beverage side, I think we see the same thing where a lot of these very advanced technical bar programs, from a skill standpoint, certainly aren't lessening their chops, but from an execution standpoint, some of the best bar programs in the country are simplifying some of their cocktail menus. And not talking about classics per se, but talking about the beauty of spirits and celebrating those flavors as opposed to the 14 steps of infusions and presentation garnishes and things like that that go into, you know, a drink that takes, you know, 7 minutes to make. So I think that there's a balance there. And when we go back to kind of that Nike analogy, you always have to have people that are pushing the art and creativity and the science on the front end of the business. But by the time it gets back to the middle of the bell curve, all we're hoping is that the conversation is elevated a little bit more and that people start to know the difference between a bourbon and an Irish whiskey or an American wheat whiskey. Do you know what I mean? It's just giving people some good basic tools in the conversation around the kind of drinks that we produce in order to become smarter consumers. And sometimes the pendulum has to swing both ways before it kind of finds a happy medium.
That's another part of the balance that's kind of funny too, is that as a consumer, I learn more from going to more cocktail bars and learning more about what these drinks are. And then when you go to another a cocktail bar, you have no idea whether they're going to treat you like you're fresh off the street or like, no, I know what bitters are. You know, I mean, because the way that the consumers kind of like elevate, it's wavy. It's all over the place. So it kind of adds an extra wrinkle to your job as well, where it's like you don't have to explain to somebody what a beer is, you know, in your old standard like bartender sense.
Travis, think about this. Think about going to a bar and paying $13 for a cocktail that comes out of a draft system. Like a few years ago, I think it would really raise a lot of eyebrows that we're paying a premium price for a cocktail that literally the bartender is going like this over ice, right? But I think in practice, as you go out, and you definitely go out to some of these really great technical bar programs, you start to realize that, in fact, those cocktails are still made freshly, and the reason that they're batched isn't only just for speed, which certainly helps in a busy bar, but to ensure that every cocktail you get is perfectly balanced and consistent through the service. So it's still justifiable at the same price point, absolutely. But again, I think it's one of those elements as we become smarter about the way that we order our food and drink our beverages. Those things over the next couple of years are going to make a big impact in terms of the way that we create menus and even products.
And that might be just a perfect place to end there before we get into our audience Q&A section. Think about, that's probably the best way to describe the rapid evolution in the last 5 or 6 years. We go from being like, hey, we're going to make your drink fresh, to now you might have a part of the consumer base that's actually a little bit off-put that you're going to have a fresh cocktail from a draft system. Like, wait, no, I need to see the bartender make it. They need to do all the things. So we've almost conditioned the customer base in a very short amount of time to a whole different way of imbibing. Obviously, that's I'm making sure we're on time here. This is the portion of our show. This is the tradition at the CMC to hear from you guys. That's obviously the big point. You want to hear. We tell you Columbus's stories, and we want to hear your feedback on that. So at this point, we would invite anyone who would like to line up at the microphone there in the back to ask some questions of our panel. All right, there we are. We have some eager participants. I'm like, is this just the one topic that only a few people want to ask questions about, and they just want to go back? You guys just want to go back over here and have a few more cocktails? That's how you really learn about the craft. I'm going to go ahead and state your name, and then who would you like to direct your question towards?
Doesn't feel like it's on. I'm Carol McGuire. Thank you all for being here and adding to our wonderful holiday celebration with CMC. I'm wondering, what's the creative process that you go through to develop a new product in the case of a liquor at the distillery or a spirit? And cocktails. I mean, where does your inspiration come from, and how do you develop those products that, do you have like focus groups, and if so, can I like get on the list?
Yeah, real quick on the kind of the consumer packaged goods side. Any product that my business partner Ryan Lang and I come up with is usually about a year in development. There's a lot of tasting. Clear spirits a little different than dark spirits. Grain to bottle for testing in a clear spirit like a vodka or a gin, or even something like a brandy, can happen fairly quickly in a facility like Middle West. Usually inwards of 30 days to do good iterations on a product. Dark spirits, you make a dark spirit, you don't know what's going to happen. It's got to sit in a barrel. A straight whiskey, the youngest whiskey that I would normally buy on a shelf is a minimum of 2 years in barrel. And barrel aging of a whiskey, it goes through all kinds of different points in its maturation process that, again, you never know just when it's going to hit a perfect inflection point until it gets to that. So
that's a part of it. Not only is it really difficult financially to get to the shelves, but we're pretty sure it's going to be good. Let's just wait. Yeah.
But I think to your point, it's a little bit, for us, it's a little bit different. Our snapshot is 1 to 3 years out and trying to anticipate where market trend is going. Not unlike fashion. In Columbus, my partner works out at Abercrombie, and they're working always 18 months out, and we're kind of on the same product cycle, trying to anticipate: is gin going to cycle like corduroy again this year? Is it? Yeah, I mean, it's what's going to be popular, and also where the premium is in the industry, and our supply chains are much longer and much bigger for us to resolve these things. But I'll tell you, for 4 years, we didn't focus group our products. Ryan and I made products that we loved. We did things that we thought were true to our place of origin, and always trying to find a different way of representing our philosophy in the products we made. And when we did sample them, because we've always referenced Middle West as a culinary creative company and a culinary company as opposed to manufacturer, we tended to bring our friends in that ran kitchens, so chefs, certainly trade bartenders that had great palates, to come in and challenge some of our ideas and our thoughts about where the product was going. Moving forward, that may change. So if you're interested, leave me your business card before we wrap up today. So
that's one thing I don't want to miss there about saying that. I think that goes for the rest of the bartenders in the cocktail scene too, is that there's ideas being shared back and forth amongst one another, but it's mostly people really, really interested in the craft and they have their own inspirations and their own sort of like travels and journeys and putting their own spin on drinks. And just as a result of many, many people doing that, you have this new scene as opposed to everybody paying too much attention to local trends and who likes what. You put a product on the shelf or a product on the bar that you really like, and I think the customers kind of come with that a little bit. So I think that's a really unique thing about a young local industry, kind of like what we have right now.
And both of those spirits you drank tonight or today, boy, cocktails at 11. It's a good day. I know 2 of the bottles of Ohio, the honey vanilla bean and the stone fruit, those recipes were both impacted in significant ways by the production kitchen and our work with Jenny Britton-Bauer back in the day a few years ago. So big redirects in our recipe development based on shared supply chains and some off-the-wall conversations. And it is important, even from just a local partnership standpoint, whether it's from the trade or from our trade. There's a lot of collaboration and connective tissue between companies here. So.
Thank you. All right, next question.
Hi, I'm Beth Irvin. I'm with Experience Columbus. At Experience Columbus, our job is to showcase the best of Columbus to the world, and I want to thank you for being a part of the best of Columbus. We really appreciate all the work you do. Recently, we've gotten, or not recently, for several years, we've gotten a lot of national attention to our artisan distilleries and our craft cocktail scene. And to do that, you have to be in some way distinctive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how our scene may be distinctive from that in other cities.
Yeah, it's your turn, Cris.
You're the president.
I think we're distinctive because we're not New York or Chicago, and yet we do have, a big scene here. We have a lot of people who are really serious about it. Our food scene is great. We've got, the distilleries, we've got breweries, and everybody is now taking it seriously. So you've got a lot of people who are making this their life's work. We've got some really great cocktail bars. The United States Bartenders Guild, that's been a big part of it because we've built that chapter. And when we first started, so going back 6-7 years ago, there was one chapter for the whole state, and there were 4 people in it. And the president was in Cincinnati, and then I was here, and I was the secretary, and somebody else was in Cleveland, and we were all trying to get together for meetings, which never happened.
How long ago was that?
That was 6 years ago.
Wow.
And we never did anything with it, So then I kind of really started to embrace it and build it here. And once we got enough members here, and Cleveland got enough of their own members, we split. So Cleveland got its own chapter. So now they're up to like 75, 80 members as well. And then we just continued to build ours. It's given us a lot of national press. And like I said, it makes us distinctive because we are now looked at as more of a major market in the country as opposed to, little Podunk, Ohio, which a lot of people thought we were for a long time.
I think there's a lot of really great bartenders in the city that are really pushing the envelope and doing some really, really unique and exciting stuff too. And that's from, looking at, nationally what's going on. We have some really talented people that are working in this town.
Travis, there's something that, maybe not something that I said, but something that I heard in a conversation that I had a few months ago. So a gentleman from the Wall Street Journal called and was asking about Columbus, and we had a good conversation. And he said, in all my visits to Columbus, and something that we're kind of seeing nationally in Columbus as a part of this, is there's a certain level of authenticity in the work, in the trade, in the service that happens here, that when you go to New York and LA and San Francisco and Seattle, a lot of the ideas are replicated off of ideas that actually happen in the Midwest. And it's something that I, living here, you don't see as much because we sit in the soup here, right? But having somebody else coming from a first-tier market, a major market, and coming in and saying, oh, there was this really great idea that opened in New York that, by the way, copied your company, right? Or copied your menu, and they killed it with, a lot of additional resources, but it didn't have the authenticity of what's happening out here. And I think that's a big part of our flavor. Is this is ground zero for new ideas.
Yeah, Columbus is one of the key ingredients. It doesn't just happen to be the soil where this is growing. When you say, and just to add to that question, if I could, when you say we're starting to be considered a major market, is that, You mean from the press standpoint, from brand ambassadors, from other spirit companies, and also with the locals? Or can you give us an idea of what that means in terms of like economically, not just like reputation, but where are you seeing most of that impact in terms of us being seen differently?
From all of that, I mean, brands. One thing that we do with USBG is we bring in brand ambassadors. So we'll bring in somebody from Scotland to talk about their Scotch, or from Kentucky to talk about their bourbon. And it's not worth it to send somebody from Scotland if you've got 6 people sitting in a room.
Although they could have done Ohio in one day 6 years ago. Now they have to make 2 stops.
But now, we're getting that recognition. We're getting big national competitions. We're just we're seeing them not pass us by and only do New York and Chicago, but like Columbus is a stop as well, or Cleveland, so it's great. So we're just getting a lot of press nationally in the mixology world.
Call us a flyover state if you want, but you're missing out on some good booze. You should stop. Jane, Brady, do you have something to add to that?
Brand side of the business, but there's also the business side. And I remember Ryan and I stumbled across a presentation and somebody that was giving the presentation that had maybe a few too many things to drink down at a conference in New Orleans a year or two ago. And he had referenced that for their company, a very large brown spirits company, that while Ohio was the 9th largest market for them in the U.S., it was the #1 most profitable. And I think that resources follow money. And as a market, I think we need to embrace that.
Thank you for being here. I'm Jane Scott. I have a dozen questions for you, so I'm trying to narrow it down. I was in the winery business for 22 years, and the first winery here in Columbus, and it was tough, really, really tough. When we first started in the business, there were 25 wineries in Ohio, and now I think the last count, there are 225 licenses in the state. So we went through a lot of the same evolution that you all are doing now. My question to you, probably to Brady, I can remember having some extremely interesting conversation with bankers early on. Can you explain how you're working with the financial institutions and helping them understand that whiskey in a barrel isn't going to produce anything for 3 years? And has the community, are they getting that? Are they supporting you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grin and grimace at the same time. How many people here work for banks, by the way? I saw Chase earlier. We've had I think a good run over the last 7 years. I'll tell you, when we launched Middle West, we presented the idea in 2008 to 17 banks, national, regional, and local. 16 said no. That was also alongside the recession. So it was a fully funded project initially, and then the bottom dropped out of the market, and Ryan and I lost our life savings like everybody else did, and all of our notes came due, and we had to pay for the distillery with something. So we went out and we sold the project to banks, and they said if you were a Subway, we would give you money, but we don't know anything about a distillery. Only one bank came to our side, and that was KeyBank out of Cleveland, and they fought for us and were able to secure a loan, but not without several reapplications. In fact, the only reason we got our first loan, and I always love referencing this, was because of the Independent Restaurant Association here in Columbus. We actually got declined for our financing, and we went back on appeal with the SBA with 50% collateral. So any bankers in here, that should make you, I guess, smile and grimace, because it's usually only 5 to 10% down, but 50% in collateral, and a list of 50 restaurants led by Liz Lesner at the time that said, if Brady and Ryan build it, we will come. And as a result of that, we got our financing, and that's the only reason why. So we try to pay that back every day, but a couple of years after that, we refied and had a great relationship for a few years with Huntington. And as a result of changes in the market and our desire to become a little bit bigger, and maybe Huntington at the time was a little less creative in the way that they thought about collateralizing assets. And I think that goes back to the wine business, is that if you were to tell a winemaker that Burgundy that they had in their cellars for 10 years or 15 years was only the cost of the grapes and the wood, it would be offensive. And in the financial markets, we were offended every day on the way that traditional financial institutions were looking at our assets. We currently work with a great bank locally called Heartland. Scott McComb, the bank president there, has worked with us for a few years and being very thoughtful and creative about the way that we collateralize the things that we own as a company. And as a result of that, announced earlier this year, 2 different properties, each with about $3 million in capital investments going into them this year. So the opportunity for us has increased over time, and the more local we become, the more support we've seen on the financing side. But it's not for the faint-hearted at all. It's definitely a challenging model that we're only at the beginning of, as a category, really figuring out.
Hi, thanks for being here today. I'm very curious, I don't know if I made up this fact, if it's true, but did the mixed drink movement come out of Prohibition and, really masking the flavor of bad booze? And if so, I mean, I'm really curious about the evolution. And then you mentioned it kind of as fashion. Are there, favorites now, or do you go through kind of an evolution of, best drinks or next drinks?
That's how my home bar evolved. Yeah, I mean, that's how I learned how to mix drinks. How about you guys?
Well, mixed drinks started before Prohibition, long before. The mint julep dates back to the mid 1800s. I mean, so there were some really, really special cocktails that were created long before 1920. And yes, there were a lot of cocktails made during that time too, and they were trying to mask the bad booze. There wasn't a lot of booze, and the ones that people could make, gin in their bathtub, that really did happen, and it was bad and could have killed people. So, but some of the most classic cocktails that you think of when you think of classic cocktails were all made prior to Prohibition.
And maybe this would be a good thing to wrap up on here, but I think this is kind of, again, part of this constant evolution. You're bringing a certain part of the populace up to speed with sort of craft cocktails and classic cocktails, at all times. And you're also catering to a further evolving base that's like, yes, I know what an old fashioned is. Now I want to try your barrel aged X, or now I want to, what's the new thing that you're working on? Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that. And I think, Brady, you could even weigh in on that too, in terms of the products you're trying to put out. Because you guys are doing, different things, different takes with your pumpernickel rye just coming out. What is the balance between sort of like, maybe it's even the decision between like focusing more on improving the quality and going forward with like you said, something more simple, not a 12-step cocktail, or with your vodka or with your whiskey, or let's specialize, let's go niche, let's go more creative. Is that a sort of a constant battle that you guys go through in each areas of what you're doing?
Well, I think that it's really important to kind of know the rules to be able to break them or bend them. And that's really kind of how I look at, the classic recipes. It's really important to kind of have that, be able to explain it to people, but then be able to understand and have that knowledge of how those things are typically put together. Then you can start to manipulate the flavors really quickly. So once you understand kind of the base formulas that a lot of things are put together in, once you then start adding kind of new techniques and interesting infusions or interesting submixers, then you start to really kind of break outside of that and push cocktails in a different way completely. But I think it's very important to know that history of where it comes from, and really just know what to break, know what rules to break then.
Real quickly before we turn things back over to Mindy for today, and I do want to thank you guys, which she will thank you as well, for having this conversation. Real quickly before to go to her, give me one drink that you're really enjoying making right now and one drink that you'd rather just not.
Vodka and soda can go away as far as I'm concerned. It's,
there you go.
It is what it is in its recipe. It's Mike. I have a lot of drinks that I really love to make. My current favorite is a cocktail called The Written Word. It's one of my original creations. It's a play on the Last Word, one of my favorite cocktails, but it utilizes yellow chartreuse, Rittenhouse rye, a strawberry basil jam that we make in-house, lemon juice and honey. And that's all kind of shaken down together and presented with a strawberry and like a lemon twist garnish. Really, really incredible, and it packs a really, really awesome boozy punch.
All right, well, if you guys don't know what half of that is, like I don't, you should go check that out as soon as you
I'll be
can.
more than happy to explain it to me. Come on down to Denmark, I'll show you.
And with that, we'll turn it back over to Mindy.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. I certainly did, as well as the pre-forum with the cocktails. We encourage you to continue the conversation in the lobby with coffee and cookies and to continue sampling the cocktails. Remember to use the gift envelopes at your place setting. Please include CMC in your year-end tax deductible contributions to help us match our $20,000 gift. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our speakers, Travis Hoewischer, Brady Konya, Cris Dehlavi, and Garry White. And thanks to all of you for being here. We'll see you next year.